and the irony is that even when someone like Nick Kristof thinks he's not agreeing with me, he's actually proving my point. So he's arguing that we're not acknowledging all the people who are making heroic efforts to reform the faith or to criticize so-called extremism. But then he goes on to say how much courage this takes, because their lives are in danger in dozens of Muslim countries merely for advocating for human rights, which of course proves my point. That the point is that there's what we're calling radical Islam or extremist Islam or fundamentalist Islam is massively well subscribed in the Muslim world, and there are reams of polling data to attest to this. Many liberals want to grade Islam on a curve, that we're not expecting the same kind of civility and openness to free speech and other liberties that we hold dear and are right to hold dear from Muslims throughout the world. And so when cartoonists draw the wrong cartoon and embassies start burning, we criticize the cartoonists, and we criticize the newspapers that printed the cartoons, and we practice self-censorship. There was an academic book at Yale University Press on the cartoon controversy that wouldn't publish the cartoons. This is just madness, and it's a double standard that if you actually want to look for racism and bigotry, this is the bigotry of low expectations. This is a kind of racism that, and this point doesn't originate with me. My friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali has made this point many times. And so what we need is the same standard of reasonableness and tolerance applied across the board.
Okay.
But I'm very much a fan of construing this conflict between religion and science in zero-sum terms, because science is intrinsically the enemy of dogmatism. And there is nowhere in our discourse where dogmatism is more celebrated than in the discourse of religion. So we do not respect stupidity in this country, but we systematically respect religious stupidity. And I think there's a basic truth about us that no double standard can erase. Either a person is being intellectually honest or he isn't. Either a person is willing to look dispassionately at the data, or he's trying to conform the data to his prior conception of the world. And science, when it is working, which is to say when it is really science, amounts to a systematic eschewal of dogma. I mean, dogma in science is humiliating whenever it's recognized to be dogma. Now to you is that it seemed to me you're pointing out the role of bias in science. You're saying that you can pick out individual scientists or individual theories or individual moments in science where scientists were just flat wrong, and they were wrong based on their own biases. And that is a totally legitimate thing to do. It is a totally scientific thing to do. I mean, bias in science is bad science. Bias in religion is faith, it's doctrine, it's redeeming, it's holy. I mean, you don't have the same corrective mechanism in religion. So one truth I think in need of telling is this, that there really is a conflict between religion and science, between faith and reason. Because every religion is making claims about the way the world is. These are claims about the divine origin of certain books, about the virgin birth of certain people, about the survival of the human personality after death. These claims purport to be about reality. They are claims about what was and what is and what will be. And this inevitably puts religion on a collision course with science, because these are claims made on bad evidence. And we don't have to distinguish hard science and soft science here. I mean, the core of science is not mathematical modeling. It is intellectual honesty. It is a willingness to have our certainties about the world constrained by good evidence and good argument. That what troubles me, and I know troubles Richard about this, is that religious people tend not to be honest about where those changes are coming from. They're coming from, to my mind, the hammer blows of modernity that make certain religious doctrines untenable. So, for instance, now the Pope is rethinking the doctrine about contraception. Maybe
a married couple, within the context of a marriage, if one is HIV positive, maybe it's okay to use a condom. Let's say he gives ground on that.
Yeah.
That will not be a sign of the vibrancy of Christian dialogue getting to the truth of the matter. That will be a sign of a given religious dogma becoming untenable in the face of its practical consequences and in the face of the fact that there's no good reason to have it there in the first place. And the only reason why a person needs faith to accept these claims is because the evidence for them is remarkably thin. So I really think it is time we admitted that faith is really the permission that religious people give one another to believe things strongly when reasons fail. Now, there are, of course, many people who argue that there is no conflict between religion and science. How do they do this? Well, here's how the trick is done. First, they argue that science cannot prove that God does not exist. Atheism is a faith. Atheism is the faith that there is no God. Can you prove that Jesus was not the Son of God? Can you prove that he did not rise from the dead on the third day? No. Now, I find it amazing how much work these maneuvers actually do for people. It seems to me that Bertrand Russell, I think as many of you know, closed the door to this kind of thinking for all time with his famous celestial teapot argument. Can we prove that there's not a China teapot in elliptical orbit around the sun at this moment? No. Does it make it reasonable to believe in the existence of such a teapot? No. Is it reasonable to be agnostic about such a teapot? Not quite. End of argument. I mean, it's obvious that the burden is not upon the atheist to prove the absence of celestial teapots. In the face of any scientific finding, there are two different questions you can ask. You can ask, does this datum suggest the existence of God? Or you can ask, is this compatible with the existence of God? And they seem similar. They have very different results. Let me take one fact, that 99% of all the species that have ever lived on Earth are now extinct. Does this fact suggest that an omniscient and omnipotent and perfectly benevolent God has designed our world? Not at all. I mean, that's probably the last thing you would infer from such a fact. But ask the other question. Ask, is this fact compatible with the existence of the biblical God? The answer to that question, of course, is yes, and it is always yes. You simply must add caveats like, who can understand the will of God? He may have wanted to destroy his creation for some reason that surpasses our understanding.